Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last and best day of Startup Boston. We've made it through the week. Hopefully, you've learned a lot, but we're going to keep that trend going. As you know, Startup Boston started 5 years ago because our founder wanted everybody in Boston who was working at a startup to have opportunity to learn from each other and to build community and feel like they weren't alone, which a lot of us have felt when we've been starting up our own things before. So really, community and education have been our goals through the whole thing. And so we're going to keep going with that. Our session this morning is Ready for the Journey, identifying CEOs who have what it takes to actually build a startup. Hopefully, this is the session you meant to be in. If it turns out you're supposed to be in a different session, you can go back up to the agenda at the top left and find the session you should be in. But hopefully, this is the right place for you. So one last thing is we are still running our contest. So if you haven't been to other sessions, pay very close attention to what your speakers are saying here. If you quote something they say and hashtag SBW 2021, post it on social media, you'll be entered into our raffle to win one of 5 $100 gift cards to a local Black-owned business, which is pretty cool and I think a really great prize. So hopefully you'll be able to do that. And thanks for joining us today. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelist and our moderator. Lucy, take it away.
Thanks so much, Christine. Good morning, everyone. I see we've got a good group of folks on the call today already, which is fantastic. And it's only 8:02, so good morning. Big thanks to Startup Boston, to Christine, and to my fellow panelists here for making time this morning. I'm really excited about the conversation, mostly because I know these women are all brilliant and will have wonderful things today for us. So before we get started, let's just do quick intros. I'll share that I am the Chief People Officer at Butterfly MX. My career has been both in large organizations like Forrester Research and TripAdvisor, and now I'm on my third startup. So have had a really fun journey getting to know small businesses, and I just love scaling small businesses. So that is why I'm here and excited. Sarah, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Sarah Payan. My career has only been startups since I graduated college. I started at Drift when they were 35 people in 2017 and recently post-Series B. And then in early 2020, I joined Alice. We just raised a Series B. So I really like that startup to scale up kind of growth plan. And then once a company gets to like scale up to, potentially IPOing or thinking about that or acquisition, I like to find the next exciting place to go.
Fantastic. Thank you. Christina.
So my background is actually a little interesting. So I'm first and foremost an IP attorney. So I've been an attorney for the last 10 years, working with startups in different various stages, from small to the big eyes. And I'm also a startup founder as well, too. I'm a startup founder of a travel tech company here in Boston called Voyager, where we actually create mobile apps for travel planners that want to keep on to the most up-to-date information and also keep themselves safe. So we've been really focusing on COVID, and we have different spheres that we're going into in the future. So I have had a taste of both on the back end and also being a front end developer in some ways of being a founder. So I can't wait to give you guys my different takes.
Thank you so much. Terry.
Hi, so I have a finance background, CPA type finance background, and I've also worked in, similar to Sarah and Lucy, I've worked in various places. I've worked in corporate environments, small business, startups that have been in Series B, right after that Series B, that same startup to scale up type of thing. One of them was Q1 Labs. We were purchased by IBM. Cybersecurity seems to be my niche, I guess, at this point. And recently I was at BitSite, VP of Finance there. And in those 6 years, we grew tenfold. They've been in the news this week with their partnership with Moody's. And now I'm with Sunray Security, another cybersecurity in the cloud company.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. So let's dive in. I know we're going to be talking about founders specifically and teams, but before we get there, let's talk a little bit about just the business in general. So Terry, I wonder if you could share with us how you have been able to think about the business and really evaluate whether a startup has potential to scale.
So I think when you're looking at jobs, it's not just the founder, but take a step back and look at the startup itself. Look at what you're really looking for, right? And what are the attributes? Like, people tend to like startups because they're usually a young company. They're working on something new, some cool product and innovative. Um, since they tend to be smaller, so you can see more of the company instead of just being like one little piece in a place. Usually it's a company where you can be a contributor and actually be part of the building. And, the culture is more agile, right? It's teamwork focused, customer focused. Big companies try to do that, but you have a better chance with those startups. It's just that type, right? So it's not just the founder, but really look at the whole thing. Like, get a product demo, look at it, see if it's something, like, if you're in love with what they're selling and marketing to the customer, then that's really going to impact you. And then when you talk to the people there, like, what would your role be there and compare to the whole thing, so that can you sense yourself building, like, figure out what it is that you really want in your startup and then go after it. And if it was the culture, then what are their values? What's their mission? And really look at it holistically and not just the founder. I would just encourage everybody to do that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, your point about particularly if you've not been in the startup environment before, that ability to impact the entire business is very real and can be very different from other organizations. And so, to your point, really getting a sense of that, I think, is important during the, getting to know them process. Thank you for that, Terry. Christina, did you want to add anything to that? You are on mute.
That must be the most repeated phrase of 2021.
We should all get a dime every time. Someone says
that. One thing that I have advised students when they're looking at, at a startup is take a role as an investor, because you're investing your time, you're investing your effort. So how would an investor look at this company that you are looking at? Is it really going to scale? Is it actually going to grow exponentially? Or is it simply a skill set that really is very much tied to the founder? And if it really cannot grow beyond the founder, then it really can't scale, which also might give you an indication of what can you really add to the company if the founder is really key on in it moving forward. It really should move beyond the founder. So if the initial pitch that the founder is giving you is really honed into what they are doing and what they can do, but not actually what you can do, there might be some flags that maybe you need to consider before saying yes.
It's a fantastic insight, and actually is a nice transition to talking a little bit about the founding team there. And I apologize, I didn't mention this. For those watching in the Q&A, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put that in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that and share. We really want to make sure we obviously have our questions set, but we want to make sure this is valuable to you. So if anyone has particular questions, please let us know. So let's talk a little bit more about sort of profiles of founders or teams. I'm interested to understand, Sarah, you've now worked at a few startups. Do you think there's one right profile, or are there particular components, things that you look for in founders or founding teams?
I think there's not one set profile. I think there's a very common profile in tech founders in specific spaces. So I think Boston specifically has a lot of biotech, a lot of marketing technology, and a lot of cybersecurity. That's kind of just where the tech companies kind of fall. I have experience with MarTech, marketing technology, so I can kind of speak to that. A lot of those founders are either multi-time founders because marketing technology has kind of boomed into what was a kind of small, someone can't hear me. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Alexander said she can't hear me. Oh, okay, cool. Wow. That was stressful for a second. But I think that there are two different kinds of MarTech founders. The ones who have been in the space, they get it. They are multi-time founders. They've done it before and they kind of understand the landscape. And then newer founders who come in and because they have experienced something that was negative and they want to fix it. And those two different kinds of founders are going to give you two different kinds of startup experiences. One is going to be very directed in a like product, like they know exactly what the product can and should be. And so it's going to be product market fit, like super important to start. And the other one I think is going to be more like, how can we build like a tight knit community around a specific product so I can get feedback on the product? And it's kind of, what company do you want to get started within? I market in marketing technology, which is very meta. But for me, both of those opportunities are exciting for different ways. When you have a really set in stone product, it's easy to do your job of making sure that people know about the product because it works and it's there. But when you have a community, you have a direct feedback loop, which is also really exciting. You can do something and it may not work, but you know, like immediately, and you get that feedback. And that can be really scary when you first get started. When I started my first job out of college at a tech company, I was in support. So I was getting direct feedback, and there was a lot of feedback that could be given. And it was a little bit overwhelming of just like, how do these people care so much about this really new product? But it's really impactful because then you can see your direct impact of sharing that feedback with the team that then makes changes because you sit right next to them, or you can Slack them because remote forever now. But it's really cool and it's really exciting, but it's also like, one of them is going to have a stronger product direction than the other, and one may have a better feedback loop than the other. And it's kind of, sometimes they're together, but not all the time. But I think that's kind of like what I've seen of just like the two different kinds of founders in this like particular area of Boston tech.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. And I think the type of work or the mindset of the founder and how it impacts your everyday work is very real. And so that's, I think, that's what you're getting at in that area. And so that's really helpful. Thank you. Terry, what do you think about sort of like characteristics of founders?
Well, it's interesting because Sarah, I like your viewpoint because of how you look at it. I would have I was thinking, or the way I'd say there's different founders in a different facet, just to go in a different dimension. I think there are, when you think about like, what's the role of the founder, right? If the founder's the CEO and leading the company, right? This person's supposed to be a leader and a manager, supposed to be strategic, but also do the day-to-day, supposed to be multifunctional, right? Okay, I got the product. I got to figure out how to market it. I got to figure out how to sell it. I got to do the customer. I need to keep the finances in balance. I got to motivate my employees. Like,
it's a really easy job is what you're saying. It's like super, anybody can do it.
That's right. You're looking for like, Superman, Wonder Woman kind of person, right? Like, and a person can't really do it all. So I think a lot of it, if you're looking at the kind of founder, you need to know that they know they can't do it all. You need to make sure they have some kind of balance in their head and some kind of awareness, some kind of self-awareness that, okay, I can get this to this far, and then I'm going to need a specialist in this area. And I have to plan and figure out my own strengths and that founder, their own strengths and weaknesses to figure out how they are going to gradually build. And not everybody can. And there's a time where you just have to, I think Christina even may have said this earlier, somebody did. There will be a time where you'll need to step away. Like, yep, that's going to be somebody else's job. This part of the company will be that person's job. And that's the right thing because you can't be it all. So I think in looking at a founder, I think Sarah's point's so right on in terms of many are product versus, and how they look at it. I think I also would look under the dimension of what that person's made of and how they would approach just business in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Christina, as a founder yourself, how do you think about this? How do you think about this?
I feel like you guys were describing me like to a T.
Yeah, you are Wonder Woman, number one. Got it.
Yeah, I'm a mom too, which adds a whole nother dimension as well. No, it's true. One of the things that I was very keen on, and Terry was right, like I can't do everything. I know what my strengths are. And so I was very keen when we first started figuring out, whether we had a fit. Of course, same to Sarah's point about finding a community. That's what we did. We went out to communities and went to a travel community that, is something that you would like to see first and foremost. And I used that data then to bring it back to other people who I wanted to recruit onto the team. Because I know what my skills are. My skills are looking at business acumen to see, how we can partner up with different businesses, and looking at legal. And I have some skills with some marketing. Other than that, I am not the technical person. I am not the, in sales. That wasn't really like a big thing that I had done in the past. So I knew who I needed to recruit first and foremost. So I think for characteristics, if you're really trying to find someone, first and foremost, personality. If you can't work with them, it's not going to happen. Don't even try. Be honest with yourself about what you can handle. If there's somebody who talks 50 miles an hour and you can't hear a word that they're coming out of their mouth and you're just lost, it's not going to get any better. Time will not fix that. If they're scrappy. Now, a lot of times, if you're a first-time founder, if they're not able to be agile and move in different directions, if they get really stuck on one thing, even though you clearly see there's a new way to go down and they're like, no, we got to stick with this, that's a problem. That means they're not going to do well when things really hit the fan. And also, too, if they're able to recruit people, that's actually a big thing as well. I mean, it's one thing to have this grand idea, and it could be a really good idea, but if you cannot sell people to come onto your team, who I said would be your very first investors, then that's a really big red flag in terms of how they're going to do moving forward in trying to bring on real investors into the fold. So, I would say those things, and you got to be really honest with yourself. I think sometimes when we see an idea and we really want to work on it, that we start making excuses for people. It's a relationship. Okay. Think of yourself as being in a relationship with the founder, because more than likely you're going to spend a lot of more time with them, maybe than your own family. So really treat it as such and go through the motions. And sometimes, and I've had people come in and say, I want to test this out, for a short amount of period to see whether this works. And that's okay, as long as you set those, expectations very clearly, and being okay to walk away once after, that time period is out, you're like, this is not for me as well.
Yeah, that makes
an ego part, I think, was really big for Christina. Just like, one, we should all just go work for her because she sounds like a great founder. But two, I think, finding that person who doesn't think that they can do it all and knows what their strengths are and knows what their weaknesses are, because when it comes later on in that company's life cycle and they have hired more of a team, and there's going to inevitably be turnover because of people like me and Terry who like to kind of take a startup from one phase to another and then find another startup. Making sure that you don't have a founder who feels as though they can then fill those gaps when turnover happens. Like, that's not problem solving. And especially as the startup gets bigger, you want to make sure that they know, like, if something were to happen, I know that I'm not the best person for this. I can fill in the interim if we need someone there, but like priority number one when that happens is to like make sure that the right person is in that role, and I shouldn't be that person. I think that's like big.
Yeah, things that resonated from all three of you for me is one, ability to like story tell, both from a like here, whether this is the product, this is the problem we're trying to solve, how we convince people to come join us, whatever. So storytelling, really important. Self-awareness, incredibly important. And sort of knowing enough to know that you don't know everything as your business grows. And so what does the acumen to say, when do I need to pull other people in, not even just from recruiting and adding to the team, but when do I need to go talk to my network of people and get advice, or really turn to the people that are working with me on my team and say, like, this is a problem we got to solve. How do we do it? Great. What if you had, one question you could ask a founder or a founding team during a get to know you process? I say get to know you because I think that happens much more than really like interview processes in the startup community. But like, what's a really helpful question to try to get at evaluating some of these things we're talking about?
I think not my first question, but usually the question that I inevitably like to ask is, what is the exit strategy? like, where do you want this company to go? Do you want it to be acquired, or do you want to potentially try and take it public? Because that also sets the stakes of like, okay, if you want this company to go public, like there's like a very specific growth pattern that needs to be hit of like the 3x revenue, then double, double, double. And like that's hard to do. And it makes you have to make sure to hire people who are ready, willing, able to help a company get there. If it's acquisition, the stakes are a little bit lower, but then you have to build like raving fans, you know? And so it kind of helps you with the prioritization and also understanding of like, what am I getting myself into? Like, what does this founder believe in for this company? And if you kind of disagree, if you like don't really see the product strength and they're like, we're going IPO, that could also be a sign of, you know, like the ego and humility of, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. A follow-up to that, and folks in my network have asked me this question is like, how, you know, what's your exit strategy? How much also is appropriate to ask around financials, around, you know, you're talking to someone who this can be very like, they can be very emotionally tied to it. So how do you navigate, or what level of questions do you feel like is appropriate to ask when you're evaluating a startup?
So one thing actually I was going to point and say, you know, sometimes it depends on what stage the startup is in terms of what questions that you're going to ask, right? Yeah. So for instance, if it's a very early stage company, like they're just, you know, maybe going into pre-seed mode, for instance, right? Or maybe they're bootstrapped. That could be a whole nother question to go into. Like you have to ask these questions about how are you going to pay for stuff? It's just like, that's just
like literally
pay for stuff. Do you have funding? If you don't have funding, do you plan on getting funding? How soon are you trying to get funding? Because, you know, there are times when founders, and I have done this as well too, I've asked people to come on equity and sweat equity initially, with the intention of fundraising to then bring them on to salary. So that's something that you should be very clear on at the very beginning about where the finances are, where the money is coming from, how long do they expect to do this, what's the plan to get to funding, especially if they're a first-time founder. It's going to be very difficult. And for Black founders, it's even harder. I'm still going through it. Okay. I'm still running through the gambit of finding appropriate funding for our company. And it's interesting to kind of go through that notion. So understanding where the founder is in position to where the industry is as well too. Travel took a really deep hit this past year, which dried up a lot of reserves. And so you have to understand, do I have to be really patient with this company? Do I believe in it enough to really put my time and effort into it in the expectation it's going to reach where we hope to? Or do you just want to kind of like, no, this isn't for me? So it really depends on different stages.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know we have a Q&A coming in, but Tara, I wonder from your, you know, financial background, what your advice is here.
I think Christina hit it right on. It depends on the phase that company's in. It's different structures, right? So, and if it's young, I mean, she's right. All of that. You can ask, what's your cash burn, or how much cash do you have? So you can get a feel, like if they have enough cash to get through the next 6 or 8 months, go for it, right? If it's like, well, we're really going month to month with sales that aren't necessarily going to be there, then you just need to know. Then you must but if you totally love the product and totally think the founder's right on, but then you're aware of the risk that you're taking, right? But then if they're in the later stages, let's say even Series B, I would encourage you to look to see who are their investors and what other companies have those investors invested in, right? And there is a difference between a VC investor and a PE investor. VCs want this growth, PEs want their money back, right? So, and there's a place for both of them. If you're in, if you're in the curve and you kind of, you slow down, there's a place for it for each one of them. But it is something to look at. Another question for both small and big is who's on the board? Like, who else is on that board? And then kind of go, Google's a great thing, right? Go figure out where else they've been and what they have done. If you have some really good advisors on that board who have helped with funding before, or, that type of thing. It's a lot different than if you are like starting super from scratch. Super from scratch can be good, right? Okay. When you got a good and everybody starts at scratch at some point, but then you're just aware of what it is and what the risk is, and where you're going to be going in there.
Yeah. Awareness is huge. I think that's right. Because there's so many, when we say startup, I mean, we're talking about so many different situations here and different phases and different personalities and different teams and all that. And so awareness, I think, is the most critical part. So ask as many questions as possible, do as much Googling as possible, lean on other people. I'm going to pause here and just read. I'm getting really close to the screen because even though I have my glasses, I need to get that close to read this. So question, what if a year or two into this startup, the relationship with your co-founder suddenly isn't working, in the sense that each has their own strong idea on what to do next? For example, scale marketing versus product versus team. So what's advice on how to navigate that? Certainly happens.
From a legal standpoint, you want to hear that one?
Yes, sure.
So this happens a lot, where co-founders go in different directions, or a co-founder just wants out. They just don't want to do it. And you've maybe both, done equal amount of work, or maybe not. Maybe it's been actually unequal. You're unequally yoked. One thing I will say to any startup starting out is have agreements in place. Always 100%, no matter what it is, have something in place, because you never want to think, oh, we're never going to break up. That's naive. Don't go down the naive path. Something will always happen. And so that's why you should have an agreement to say what happens when one person wants an exit strategy. Do you buy them out? Do they have a different position moving forward? Are you able to shuffle them around the team to make them feel more comfortable? Are you comfortable with any changes that should come about? So you should have an agreement in place moving forward. Now, let's say you don't. Let's say you went down the naive path and you thought everything was going to be rose colored, all that. At that point, you need to have a frank conversation, an honest conversation amongst yourselves, maybe even having maybe a mediator in case if it gets really ugly, to say, how do we move forward, and actually putting viable options on the table to actually make sure that one, you're both happy with, or at least satisfied. Happy is the wrong word. Satisfied with the end result, or it might just mean the dissolution of the startup, and that's unfortunate, but it happens a lot. I could tell you stories of relationships gone bad with co-founders. There's a story of a founder who got upset because they wanted to bring on somebody new onto the team, and he deleted the entire back end of their application. So, things happen, but as long as you put things in place, you can be sure to rebuild or start over again with a new team. Mm-hmm. That's a whole nother story. I can tell you guys another time.
Yeah, I'm like, my anxiety level just through the roof. But yeah, and it sort of goes back a little bit, what I will say, and in my role as people leader, this idea of being forthright and setting up the relationship in a forthright manner right at the beginning is so important. And so we talked a little bit about like founders being self-aware, founders, being candid, and it's okay. Like, yes, agreements need to be put in place. And so ensuring that people can navigate that, I think, is quite important, at least for me personally, to understand that this is a business, things will go wrong. Yes, there can be a lot of love and community and excitement for the product, and you just need to be sort of rational about it. And I think sometimes that can be quite difficult depending on what stage of the startup you're joining, because it gets personal. It gets quite personal.
Yeah, and I think I'd also say, if it's like conflict resolution. You have two founders. You started out someplace that was at a good place. Start looking at the common things. What are we really trying to do? Mm-hmm. What was our first love? What was our, we wanted to get this product to go there, and then try to be as objective as possible. All right, whiteboard it out, or, in terms of, okay, well, we could try this, and try to get the common part together. Because, if you put in all that, I think the hard part there is if you've really put all your blood, sweat, and tears in there for years, and then just to say goodbye to it would be, I would find that very hard, right?
Yeah.
So I think, don't just throw in the towel either, but take a step back, cool off, go jog, go whatever you do, right? And then come back in and then okay, how do I try to get some common ground. And I mean, you're right, mediate. I mean, you can do other things, and very interesting about those stories, Christina, like this. But yeah,
plenty.
Yeah.
I think one thing also is kind of going back to what we were talking about before, of knowing what your strengths are and knowing what your strengths aren't. And so your co-founder shouldn't have, or it would be nice if you didn't have the exact same skill set, because then you're both harping on the exact same part of the business when there could be an opportunity to grow marketing or to grow product. And so I'm a big proponent of experiment and prove yourself right or wrong. So because there are two of you or multiple of you, you are co-founders, one could focus on, a scrappy, how can I focus on the product? The other could focus on a scrappy, what can I do to kind of push marketing forward? And then depending on the outcome of both of those focuses from those different co-founders, you could say okay, now let's talk about the team. What areas do we think actually have the biggest gap right now based off of what we just learned from focusing on product and focusing on marketing individually, and making sure that there's a constant feedback loop from there as well. I think I'm not a founder, but I am an executor. It's hard for me sometimes to bring my head above water and think about things strategically. So the way that I like to kind of look at something like this is just do it and try it. You both split up, but communicate and plan, and then come back after a month, because things move so quickly in startups that okay, what did you learn? Did we have more people come inbound to test and trial the product, or did we have more support or fewer support conversations because the product was working better? Which one is more impactful for us?
Yes.
Let's have a conversation about outcomes versus concepts.
Yeah, it's great advice. Yep. If we just switch this a little bit and turn it to what you believe founders want to hear from potential employees, in an interview process or whatever, what, in your experience, either what have you asked people that have joined your company, or what have you been asked that you feel like everyone on this call should be prepared to answer when they're in this conversation?
One question I've always asked is, we have plans. We always have plans, but talking about those plans, executing, communicating is really key. We're a remote team. We are all over the world. How are you going to deal with us being remote? What are your communication styles? How do you like to talk to people? That's a humongous, big thing for me. Because our team is really quite all over the place. We have people from the other side of the world, throughout the US. How are you going to be available? And how are you going to collaborate with your teams? What's your style like? Because again, if there's no communication, especially when you're remote like this, there's no way in order for you to execute well. And so again, it's that testing phase. I've always in a phase of just testing things out. You say you can do this, but let's see how you really actually do this. Mm-hmm. So testing out phases, even for a month or 3 months, that's very key on me to actually see how the communication skills are. Because the first month, you're you really want to show off. You're like, yeah, I can do it. And then it's only around month 2 and 3, you get really relaxed. You really start seeing how people's styles are. So communication is definitely a big thing for me.
That's great.
I think from both sides, being asked about how you plan on solving a specific problem, from a founder, this is the problem that we are trying to solve. How would you go about solving that? Especially if you haven't been in a startup before, or you're coming in from college, or you're still early on in your career. What you can kind of discuss in that sort of question is, how can you take experience that you have through extracurriculars, through whatever applicable and transferable skills that you have learned in previous experiences, and bring that knowledge into the business is something that with the right founder can be really appealing. I came from a service background. All through high school, all through college, I worked in restaurants and like worked with children. So like patience level, super high. Ability to talk to people, super high. So coming in as the first support person for this company, having a service background is really appealing. And then I worked my way into a marketing role, which is inevitably where I wanted to be, but like getting in at that ground floor and taking your transferable skills that may not have been learned in an office space can still make you a really appealing candidate. But then on the candidate side, asking how you're going to be gold. Like, what are your expectations for me? Because if the company has no goals, red flag. We're just kind of taking it day by day. I'm like, okay, what are we working towards? Because I need to have a destination that I can then be pat on the back for reaching. Like, I'm extrinsically motivated. But also, like, how do you view my role? If I'm in marketing and you're going to goal me on leads but not revenue, then I think that your business model is a little bit misaligned between marketing and sales, because goaling marketing on leads but goaling sales on revenue is going to like butt heads, because marketing is going to be like, here are all these leads, and sales is going to be like, where's all my qualified pipeline? So I think from like both sides, use your applicable skills, and then also make sure that you are being communicated, you are getting your goals communicated back to you. Super helpful. And then can also help with like your 30, 60, 90-day plan of like, what do I need to set in stone to make sure that I hit those goals? And then also, like, is there a 30, 60, 90-day plan? Even if you are a small startup, like making sure that you're preparing to bring on another person and not just kind of like hiring them into ambiguity.
Yeah. I think that's really important. Definitely something I've seen. I would also say, I don't know why this triggered this thought in my head, but something you said did, which was, I started at larger organizations and I came to startups. And what's really important is if you've spent a lot of time in larger organizations, particularly on like the support side, like the HR side, right? Something for me that was so refreshing about startups is that like, you can just get things done, right? And that's wonderful. And you also have to like be prepared and really understand if you're up for that. Because it means, and I know everyone says this, but it's like, you're at a startup, like you literally do everything. Like if somebody needs to like organize the office, you're organizing the office. If somebody needs to blah, blah, blah. And I sort of didn't fully understand what that was, both on like how delightful it is and also how sometimes like you're just doing all the things, so I would say that just from my own experience, if you're considering shifting from a larger scaled organization into a startup and helping them scale, be just really understand that. And it doesn't mean necessarily working, till 3:00 in the morning every morning. Like, I'm not saying that, but it is a very different way of working that I have found very refreshing. But for some people, it might be like, it's actually not my interest. Thanks.
You can't be able to say that's not my job, especially in these like scale ups, and even like pre-seed startups. Like if you get hired and you think that your job is like in a swim lane, your job is the whole pool. There are just 5 different pools next to each other. Like you don't have swim lanes.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We've got a couple more questions coming in. So I'm going to start that. First is Christina, because I think this might be a quick answer. Are your team members full-time, part-time, or contract?
So I'm fully bootstrapped. So I'm not going to tie anyone to a full-time job because I can't pay them. That'd be unfair. So everyone is part-time. But we do set, boundaries in terms of what that part-time is, because you might come in, but we still expect you to do at least like a minimum 15 hours of work to check in, to be available, also to ask questions if we're throwing around ideas about things that we want to do. So everyone is part-time at 15 hours.
Thank you. And I would just say that I'll go back. I'll just tie it with it seems like you're clear about expectations.
Yeah. Oh,
which is what Sarah was talking about. Right. And so
exactly.
Particularly if the way you're engaging with a startup is not a traditional full-time salaried role, being really clear about what that means and how you're going to be measured and all that is important.
A JD is really important. Let's just say that. A job description. Sorry. A job description is really important because that gives you a very clear indication what you're what you're going to be doing. And so that will be also be the measurement that the founder will look at to see whether you actually can accomplish those things or not. So if you don't have one, ask for one. And if you can't abide by it, then don't do it.
Yep. Good advice. Kim asked a question. I need help to start up my business. And I have a friend I've worked with well in the past, but she does not have the technical or practical experience to create a more advanced assembled product, and also doesn't want to work overtime to get the project done under extraneous circumstances. Should I turn down her offer to help, knowing that she wouldn't be the right person to work with in the long term? I have thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I would say that she shouldn't be your co-founder. I would say that she bring on advisors early and often in their area of expertise and kind of bounce ideas off of them, and have them give their insight and input, but not be the person who also is responsible for making sure that you and the business get things done. Because then I feel like, Kim, that you shouldn't bring her on as full time, because it would just lead to a little bit of frustration on your part of I feel like I'm doing all the work, even though that expectation was set in the beginning of you're probably going to do most of the work, because she doesn't want to put in those extra hours, which happens in the beginning of the business.
Right. And here you have a friend. I mean, she's acknowledging it's a friend, and it's hard to see what this person really would bring to the table, right? No expertise in technical, no expertise in the practical, and doesn't have that scrappiness or, wanting to be in that fast-paced, always changing kind of environment that startups are. So it feels like it would be not the best situation in the long run, no matter how you look at it. Although it's hard to say no if it's somebody that you're close to. So that's going to take some thought as to how to approach that and tactfully explain and say no, right?
Mm-hmm. If there was anybody else, you would have already said no already. But it's the fact that there's comfort in your friend being by you in this journey, that's why you're even considering trying to find a space for her. And that's not fair to her, and that's not fair to you. So it would just be best to have a really honest, again, honesty is clear, frank conversation about, I love you, but no, this is not going to happen. Maybe in the future, maybe there's something else, maybe down the line, once we're much more established and something comes up that fits your skill set, but right now there's no space for you. And I appreciate you, and I would love to have you as my cheerleader on the side, keeping me into what I'm doing, but no, I appreciate you. That's it.
Great. I think we just lost Sarah, but that's okay. Hopefully she will be able to jump back on. So now I'd love to ask you about your own experiences and a little bit of what are red flags that, or maybe you didn't realize were red flags in the get to know you process, but turned out to be, that are important. Hey, Sarah, welcome back. That you think would be helpful for folks to hear. So things you heard in the interview process that later on you thought, oh, I could have made a different choice based on that.
Terry, you want to go?
So, it can be things that you think, it could be things that where the person that's you're interviewing with is on either side. They come across oh, they're motivated and they're strong. And then what you realize later is really they're stubborn and yeah, they have their own agenda, right? So I think, many things that are strengths can also be weaknesses. So I think you do need to step back. I think more time, whether you're the interviewer or the interviewee, the more time, I think, especially when we're remote, somehow there's something that there's no intent, I think the more time you spend with the person, the more you're able to think through I think that's a good strength, but, get that other one. Christina, I'm interested what you would have to say.
Yeah. So it's a couple of things. So first thing would be, how did they talk to you, right? I mean, and sometimes when people are first spouting out what they're capable of, what they're doing, it can sound really arrogant. But is there some sense of humbleness in too, Because if they're humble, then that means then more than likely they understand what their short givings are, and they're able to listen to others who might have advice for them. one key thing I've done is, as I'm listening to them, I actually might give them a piece of advice that I'm saying, I'm thinking about this. What do you think of that? And see what their reaction would be. If they look at me as if like I had the gall to even provide them any kind of stuff because they already know about it, that's not going to work for me, because that means they're not collaborative. That means they don't listen to sound advice from somebody who probably has much more expertise than they do. Another thing to assess as well too, who's on the team. If there are people who look as if they're much smarter than the founder, then again, that's a very key indication the founder knows they're smart, they're short givings, and they want to have the smartest people in the room surrounding them. And so, it also is about advisors as well too. So if they don't have any advisors at all, that's a red flag, because that means they're not asking for advice. If they have these plans, like these massive plans that they've explained to you, and they say, we're going to do this and this and this by this, I would ask, well, what goals have you accomplished in the last, let's say, depending on how long that they've been there for, last 6 months, X, Y, Z. If they can't really explain anything, then that means there's an execution problem that you need to figure out why. Is it because they've had less people on the team? Is it that they've tried to do it themselves? Maybe that's why they're bringing you on. I mean, it's not a major red flag. I'd say just absolute no, don't collect $200, but it is something to consider about the strength of the founder and what's happening.
Great. Sarah, did you have any thoughts around sort of like red flags, and whether it's from your personal experience or just what you've seen, things to be aware of when you're having conversations?
I think I think very similar to what Christina and Terry were kind of discussing. I think also if the product isn't alpha or in beta, and they're bringing you on to take them to market, but then there's no live date, like there's no this is the date in which we are going to release this to the world. You could be setting yourself up to have a founder who thinks very highly of themselves and their product with an execution problem, who's like, this is going to be great, this is going to be awesome, it's going to make a huge splash. Most products at this point are not an if we build this they will come kind of product. So you need to be able to have a plan to make sure that people know about your product and when it's going to be available to them, because you can talk about it all day long, but if you can't tease out a specific date, do a countdown, something along those lines, something very marketing specific, then you're just going to be kind of yelling into the void, and no one's really going to listen because you won't have anything to tell them.
Yeah, that's great. If I could pivot a little bit to, in our conversation, each of you, I've been so impressed with the particular things that you look for in the business, or just, you're obviously people that have, because you've been in the startup world, you understand the components, what to think about, even what questions to ask. Where can people find, what resources are there out there? What networking groups, in addition, obviously, to the wonderful Startup Boston community, but where can people get guidance or understand, is this a legit company? What would you recommend to people?
Do you mean to assess the startup itself, or just
really anything? How do you get information? Where do you go?
This is going to sound funny, but it's absolutely true. There is Startup Twitter. Startup Twitter is one of the most interesting spaces. There's also VC Twitter as well too. If you can start jumping in on that, that's actually really interesting. Seeing all the VC and the LPs and the GPs all talking to each other, it's really interesting. But the founders themselves are talking to each other and they're sharing information. There are threads upon threads. I have bookmarks for days about stuff that people have just said that's really resonate with me, or I'm holding on to for another rainy day. So that could be a really good place to start to see what the startup or the startup founder is using. Are they using startup Twitter to fish around and talk to others within their peers? That means, again, that collaborative spirit is there. And I think another key thing that startups should create, especially when even if they're first starting out, is a Crunchbase profile. That shows a very clear indication that they are looking to scale, that they're looking to grow, that they want to have that public profile / persona of looking to investments in the future, especially if they don't have a whole lot and they want to grow. So those are two things I'll throw out there.
I'd say Product Hunt is another place where people have like really solid discussions when there is a live product. There are like direct feedback loops from users on products that are launched that can be hunted, but then also there's kind of that Product Hunt strategy of you get a large hunter to be the first person to comment on your product launch. So you can kind of see the product experts in that company's network that vouch for them, essentially. So like, okay, Guillaume Caban, Heaton Shaw, like two big names in like early stage startups, are they commenting on these products? They're all over Product Hunt. So like, are they bought in? Do they like it? What do they have to say about it? I would say also talk to current and former employees if there are any. And if that isn't something that's offered in the interview process, why? That's like kind of going back to the red flag of like, why can't I talk to anyone else? And then also using your network of people who are potentially in that industry. Like, have you heard anything about them? Especially when you're earlier on in your career or still in college and you think it's weird to reach out to that person that you went to high school with, but that person you went to high school with is connected to someone that like works there. It's time to throw that like weird awkwardness of high school or college out the window, because now you're talking about like your career and your adult life. And no one's going to be like, no, I'm not going to talk to you unless they suck. And then that's also an indication of like, okay, if that's the culture of the company, then I think I'm good. But like reach out to your high school connections, reach out to your parents, friends, network. That's how I learned about Drift in the first place, is someone my dad knew started there. And had great things to say about it. So, kind of like toss that aside and start to actually reach out to people proactively, and then have questions that you want to ask them. Reaching out to someone to like quote unquote pick their brain is not going to get you resounding yeses of I'm willing to have a conversation with you. So make sure that you have a specific ask. And do your research on that person as well, because however, the more personal your outreach to those secondary and tertiary connections are, the more likely someone's going to accept your request to connect and then like actually schedule time to talk to you.
Yeah, really good advice. Thanks, Sarah. Terry, anything to add?
No, this is excellent advice. And I so much and resounding, right? I mean, that is true. I think everybody will talk to you. You can make use of that time or not. Probably the only other thing to add would be make sure you look at, I know earlier we talked about the board and the investors. Make sure you look at any kind of competition, look at the industry, look at market, anywhere you can get market data, and, just to know the viability of what that startup's going for. I mean, don't dismiss things, like, I don't know, when Uber started, when you think about it, there's taxi service. Why would you ever want Uber? But, it's interesting, but you have to make sure that you're really just doing your research on all. I think my point is not, the people, the founder, the investor, but then the product itself too. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Also Google, you can never go wrong with Google.
Oh yeah, I know. That's yeah.
I mean, that should be your first step. Just when they have
so easy, right?
Right.
And
there aren't dumb questions, but there are lazy questions. Like make sure that you ask not lazy questions.
Right, exactly.
It's good. It's good. Well, hey, we have a few minutes left. I wonder if, and I apologize because I didn't prep you for this one, so it's going to be on the spot. But could each of you leave our audience with, one piece of advice on what is the critical thing to think about? Hey, I've never been in a startup. I want to join a startup. I'm at a startup. I'm considering moving to a different startup. What's the one thing that people should be aware of, think about as they do that? And go ahead, Terry. Go ahead.
I would say assess why. What is it that you're really after? And then hone in on that. not just like, oh, it just seems like it's the cool thing I saw on TV, but like, why? What is it that you want? And then just make sure that you're keying in on that.
That's great. Thank you. And I was going to say something similar in that the what you want and the why you're joining is really important because every situation is so different. Like we just talked about so many different things over the last hour. The possibilities are kind of endless. And so, really understanding like, what is it about this startup that I really, that's going to fulfill me right now in this moment in my career, and honing in on that's great. So agreed.
I think early on in your career, you could graduate with a very clear vision for yourself in mind. And you think that you can accomplish that vision for yourself in startups because you can essentially get 10 years of experience in 4 years of working because you see a company grow through so many different phases. But I would say similar to making sure that your founders don't have ego and they have humility, have that for yourself as well, especially like starting at a startup that you are super passionate about, but they don't have the exact perfect role for you. The great thing about startups is that you aren't going to be confined to the job that you're hired to do. And you can kind of, jump into other people's swimming pools, to go on to that analogy I was using before of just like, you can be the most helpful person in the room, regardless of what your role was that you were hired for. And so don't stress if you're not immediately hired into your perfect job, but instead, if you're really passionate about a specific startup, try and get in at the ground floor. Like that's what I did at Drift. I had no passion to be the best support person in the world, but I believed in the product, I believed in the company, and within 9 months, I was on the marketing team because I tried and became one of the most helpful people in the room, not just by like sitting at my desk and doing my job, but making sure I was helping every single one of my colleagues however I could. And so like, don't stress, but also like just try and be there and be good at your job so that you can then, move to the role that you want to be in.
That's great. Christina.
If you're simply looking for a paycheck, this might not be the journey for you.
Yeah.
That is the most honest thing I could tell you, is that if you're simply looking for a 9-to-5 job, or you think that the startups are paying, buku money, then this is not it for you. This is not it. Startups, even those who are just starting out, they themselves are visionaries in and of themselves, because you have to see beyond what is immediately in front of you and what it can be. So if you're not a visionary, and if you're not a very creative person, or you're not a very scrappy person outside of from the founder, this is not you being a founder, this is you being an employee and joining. Mm-hmm. If you don't have that same kind of energy, then this is it's not for you. But if you do, and if you love being on the ground floor and you love building it brick by brick, and it's something that you cannot wait to actually see come to fruition, then absolutely go for it 1,000%. Put in the effort into it, and the satisfaction you'll feel once that exit comes about, whether it is acquisition or IPO, is something that you will feel so proud about. Think about those employees who have been maybe with MailChimp, who've been there for so long, and now they can see the fruition and the fruit of their labor coming out to a really great end. If you don't really find that attractive, then there are other things you can do. But if it is, then stick with it. And
I just got goosebumps as you were talking. I think I'm in the right area right now in my life. Fantastic. Christina, Sarah, Terry, thank you so much. To the audience, thanks for joining us. We hope that this was helpful. You got some nuggets of wisdom from us. And I know I'll speak for myself. If anyone would like to reach out and ask any questions, find me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to chat.
Or Twitter.
Or Twitter. That's right. Start Twitter. There we go. I got to get on that. All right. Thank you all. Take care. Have a wonderful day.